Alright, so in order to sample on your analog rhythm, first you want to make sure that whatever you have plugged in is plugged into the audio in. You do not want to use the external in. That's basically for passing audio through the analog rhythm, whereas the audio in is specifically meant for the sampling. Right now I have a Moog Mother 32 plugged into my analog rhythm up here, and I have it just plugged into the left input. Once you have that, you go over to the direct button over here. That takes you to the sampling menu. So you'll notice a couple different things on here. The source, of course, is where you're sampling from. Function and yes is to record, yes is to arm. You have your threshold here, that has to do with the arming. The source, this is where you choose the source. And then mon, that stands for monitoring. So that is where you can choose whether or not you can hear the audio coming through the analog rhythm. As I mentioned, my Mother 32 is plugged into the left audio input channel. So you set that to audio left. You have other different choices as well. You have audio right, so those are both mono, of course. So if you record audio L plus R, that is for recording stereo sources. And then you'll notice that you can also sample from the different channels themselves, as well as the main output. So if you have a pattern playing, you can sample that and then do, you know, interesting things with that. We won't be doing that today though, however. And then you can also sample from USB. That essentially has to do with overbridge. We also won't be doing that today, but you have the option if that's something you want to mess around with. Maybe I'll make a video on the overbridge sampling if that's something you guys are interested in, so let me know. So the threshold, this is the interesting one. So if you press yes, it'll arm the sampler, and you'll notice this line over here, that's the threshold. So based on wherever you set this threshold, once the audio exceeds that threshold, then it will immediately start recording. So because that way, the alternative is if you press function and yes, it'll start recording immediately as soon as you press the buttons. But if you just press yes, now it's armed and now it's ready to record. This is handy if you're sampling a guitar or something where you have to use both your hands. That's what we're going to do here today. I'm going to go ahead and press a note on the Mother 32. I'm just going to go ahead and press a C. And then go ahead and hit yes to stop. So it will normalize the sample. And so here now you can see the wave of the sample. This is also where you can trim it. You can also zoom in. So if you want to trim the edge right here, you'll notice that it would take forever to, you know, it can scrub pretty slowly, but it can also scrub pretty quickly if you zoom in. So right now by default it's pretty slow and that's for really fine scrubbing, so you can really dial in the start and end points perfectly. But in this case, let's just zoom in. Whoops, there we go, a little too much. Okay, so yeah, so now that we see the endpoint, you can go ahead and zoom in so you can see that way we can get the exact end of the note of the sample. Okay, and now let's check out, I mean, being as we use threshold, the start should be good to go, unless you find that for some weird reason it recorded like a pop or a click at the beginning. Then you would just want to you know, started after the pop or click, so that way you don't have that in your sample. So now that we have it trimmed perfectly, go ahead and hit yes, and you'll see that it does indeed trim the silence, trims the fat, so to speak. So go ahead and hit yes. You can also preview it actually, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so that sounds good. Go ahead and hit yes to save. And then I'm just going to name it Moog. It's good practice, you know, especially if you're sending these samples to other people. It's definitely good practice to indicate the BPM as well as the key. So being as in this case it's not a drum loop or anything, so there is no BPM. And the key, it's not necessarily a melodic phrase. So in this case I'm just going to put C to indicate that it is indeed a C note. So okay, go ahead and hit yes to save. Boom. So now it's saved, and I'll show you in a second. It saves it to a specific folder. Assign sample to track. Hit pad to assign, press no to skip. So this is an interesting thing you want to think about before you assign it. You know, bottom line, it just depends where you have your drums that you're using. I like to use the pads labeled as they are. Like for example, this is my bass drum, my snare drum, rim shot, clap, etc. So my thought process when I'm sampling here is I want to assign the samples to the pads that I use the least, which in my case is the toms, these in the middle here. And then of course you also have to remember that these 2, 7, and 8 are linked. So if you try to assign a sample here and a sample there, remember that you can't play those 2 samples at the same time. You can only play them one or the other. But in some cases that's a good thing. So just something to be aware of for sure. So I'm going to go ahead and assign it to channel 7 here. So I'll hit that pad, and then now you'll notice there's actually a tom being played underneath. So you want to go to the source menu. Keep in mind, I have some other videos on this that you can check out, but the analog rhythm is special because it has a sample, and then it also has an analog sound engine. So the source one is the analog sound engine. Of course, the sample menu is the sample. So being as we have a synth sample in channel 7, we want to go to the source menu and turn down the analog sound engine. So that way you just have the synth sound. Another interesting thing you want to keep in mind, if you're trying to play this sample chromatically, then and if yours doesn't do that, then you need to adjust something in your settings here. So go to settings, go to samples. Well, first I'll show you where it saves them. So if you go to the sample menu and then you go to recorded, you'll see that all your samples that you've recorded are in here. You can also preview them with function and yes. I have another Moog sample in there. So anyway, okay, so what you want to do, just back out of the menu. There we go. Function and mute. And then go down to sound settings. And then this is a very important step here. I'm pretty sure by default this is off. I had trouble with this at first, so I don't want you guys to have trouble. You go to the chromatic section here, and you want to make sure that it's set to synth plus sample. By default, it's probably just set to synth, which means that you could only play the synth engines in a chromatic sense. So you'll notice here I'm trying to play the sample chromatically, but every note is the same. So that's why you want to set it to synth plus sample. That's it for today. Hope that helps you guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.